Well, good evening and welcome to the Sunday night evening broadcast of the Church Safety Guys. I am James, and I am joined this evening by my cohorts, Paul and Mike. How are you guys doing?
Synchronized.
Right. We've been practicing that for weeks.
It kind of feels like the last time we had a conversation was last Sunday night when we were doing the same thing. I don't know.
But wasn't that a week removed? Because
it was.
It was actually. It feels like it was last Sunday, but and we appreciate your patience for last Sunday night because I know it was Mother's Day, and I think it was mostly my fault. I got tied up in the middle of something, and then I started thinking, it's Mother's Day. We really need to be focused on our moms instead of doing a broadcast. So our topic last week was supposed to be on COVID and opening up churches, and we're still working on trying to get that broadcast in and together. It seems though like churches are pretty much starting to open up and get rolling on their own. I know the last week our church has been, like, I've been in meetings left and right. It's kind of nice actually to start talking about planning for the summer and different things going on, but
it is.
Anyhow, so tonight, one of the topics that we get asked probably the most about is de-escalation and how what are good practices for that, how to go through that information and learn it. And so we're going to bring in a few minutes here, we're going to bring in John Riley. He's guesting with us this evening, and very, very skilled individual that has agreed to put up with Paul for the evening. And just Paul. Mike's usually pretty quiet. So, but anyhow, but yeah, if you're watching, feel free to list the church that you're watching from, and if you're new, because we have been getting some new folks. Our mission is to equip, train, and disciple churches and help them with safety and security teams. So a lot of what we do is we try and set up conferences. We try and partner with different folks to find training resources. We help with training resources. We can, on occasions, we can do grants, and we generally are always available for questions and help and that sort of thing. So, just to give credit to our sponsors this evening, Full Armor Church and also Trinity Security Allies have been sponsoring us, and actually tonight what we've started doing is every broadcast, every evening, we've started giving something away for the folks that are actually on and watching the live broadcast with us. So tonight what we are actually going to give away, and I'll draw a name later this evening, but we are actually going to give away a copy of the Church Suspicious Behavior book. And this book is actually a resource from Kingswood Security, and was written by Simon Osama. And he, did I say it right? No. He's going to kill me. He just logged on. He's going to be like, what in the world?
He's like, I'm going to cut him.
So anyhow, so my friend Simon, I would say that, but anyhow, we're gonna give that away. He did a fantastic job. This is actually kind of the study guide for some of his videos, and what we're going to do, actually, what he agreed to do with the book when we give it away, is he's actually going to give away a free month of access to those videos. So when we draw your name and you get this book, I'll reach out to him and we'll get you a special code where you can log in and take advantage of that content, which is great. He just updated it and started another project, which is pretty fantastic. And he's doing a great job with that project as well. He's actually, if you haven't had the chance, I'll give a quick shout out for him. If you haven't had the chance to listen, he started a project called Who I Became, and he has been interviewing some of the church safety greats and basically just talking to them and trying to find out why they were interested in church safety, how they got to the point that they're at right now. And I know he interviewed Carl Chin, and then he also just recently interviewed Stephen Williford. Mm-hmm. And that's an incredible testimony. It's a crazy story.
In my backyard.
Yeah, there's a reason I don't live in Texas.
Hey, don't mess with Texas.
It's the spiders and all the crazy church situations that happen down there.
Well, God sent me here for a reason, but we'll wait till he uses me.
Yeah, in my area, lots of the churches actually raffle guns off, and there's parts of the country that people would completely freak out about that. I mean, we're not Texas, but we're close. So,
well, I still have to laugh. I don't remember. I forget who I was telling the other day, but when Carl Chin came on, and we were like, "Hey, what do you carry to church?" And he pulls out a Winchester,
antique rifle. AR.
Yeah. He's very much similar to Stephen in that they both have a very laid back kind of personality, but it's fun. It's kind of nice to see, because a lot of times, we'll see them talking at a conference or doing their thing, but this is kind of more off the beaten path a little. So definitely check that out if you get a chance to. So anyhow, without further eloquence, he just posted, because it doesn't come up great on mine, but Who I Became, next up is Jimmy Meeks, and then he's going to have Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman on there as well. So so anyhow, without further eloquence, I will go ahead and bring Mr. Riley in. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, good evening, everybody.
Hey, John.
Did I say your last name right? I didn't.
Riley, yeah, you got it.
Riley. I'm probably gonna get 5 or 6 text messages tomorrow from Simon.
Yeah, this is going to be a grammar class too. Cultural name pronunciation, right?
Oh my goodness. Well, getting started this evening, I definitely appreciate your time. I appreciate you being willing to join us. And I do want to say, starting off, thank you for your service. I know you have some Army experience, so we're grateful for that. And thank you for your law enforcement experience as well, because I know that this week is the Memorial Week.
Yep.
But we definitely are very, very honored to get a chance to talk to individuals like yourself that have put God and country first. And so it's always kind of a pleasure to chat with you. But that being said, de-escalation, as I mentioned it before, is probably one of the largest topics that we've had people come to us and say, can you do training on this? Can you talk about it? Can you have somebody on to talk about it? But that being said, go ahead and tell us. I'll turn it over to you to tell us your background and story and that info.
Okay. Well, and thank you for inviting me to come on. It's an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate your kind words for my service. I did 7 years in the Army as an infantry grunt. As a matter of fact, Fort Hood, Texas was my last duty station. Ended up, after 7 years as an infantryman, deciding I wanted to do something more, and came up here to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and became a police officer here. And learned early on in my career that it's not always about lights and sirens and foot chases and stuff like that. I discovered that a vast majority of my time was spent simply just interacting with people. counseling, encouraging, inspiring, chastising, mediating, and de-escalating. And I discovered also that I had a knack for dealing with some really volatile situations. And any one of us, any one of you guys can probably think of 1 or 2 people in your life who you would characterize and describe as having a knack for people in stress. If you go back and look at those situations that you observed them in that gave you that impression about them, you'll find that it had everything to do with their tone of voice, the words they used, their engagement with the person at the moment, active reflective listening, and even their body posture, body language, facial expression, right? So put that in the back of your mind. So years go by. I retired in 2015. Now, I had begun to work towards another career as a charter pilot. I had gotten my pilot's license when I was in high school. And now as my career as a police officer wound down, I was like, you know what? I want to finally do what I really want to do and just be a pilot. So between 2012 and 2015, I put a lot of money and effort into working on getting my commercial rating, which would allow me to fly for hire. Mm-hmm. And I was well on my way. Almost, I tell folks I basically had a job waiting for me at the airport I was flying at here in Muskegon. And in 2016, my church security team, I attend one of our larger churches here in West Michigan. We average about 3,000 some people, 2 services on Sundays. I'm on staff there now and on the security team there. But in 2016, about a year after I'd retired, they had asked me to do a de-escalation class for our people.
Nice.
And I said, sure, I'd do it. And as I sat down to put the class together, there was a lot of things that really came to mind that I had observed, not only in our own church security people, among our greeters and ushers who have a lot of contact with people, but I'd also heard stories from other churches. And it hit me like a ton of bricks that there's really a need here to go and try to, because there's 2 parts to successfully and effectively de-escalating situation. Number 1, part 1 is that initial contact. Number 2 is the actual interaction. A lot of people do not realize, and we'll get into this in a little bit, that effective de-escalation really begins before a single word is spoken. So I started to put the class together, and it hit me like a ton of bricks as I was putting it together. This is really where it became a ministry, because I suddenly felt an overwhelming urge and basically a guidance that I was going to stop and drop everything that I was doing. And without a business or accounting background, I was going to go out and basically start this business and try to bring this type of training to churches. And I tell people that this must have been the way it felt to Paul on the road to Damascus. You're focused, you have a mission, you have an objective, and then all of a sudden, just like that, you drop everything and go in the opposite direction. It makes no sense that I would do and that I'm where I'm at right now. But here I am. 4 years later, my team and I have an opportunity to travel around the country. As a matter of fact, in March of 2018, we were in Tip City, Ohio, just north of Dayton.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Jim, you're in Ohio, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, we were in Tip City. So we get to travel around, and now my team and I train churches, businesses, corporations, state agencies, and so on. And I got to tell you, one of the things I made sure of as I created this training program, I am not just another lecture presentation, and the magic really happens with the men and women who are my instructor role players. Because without them, I would just be another lecture presentation. I would just be another face on YouTube. You cannot develop stress inoculation, muscle memory, self-confidence, and confidence in other colleagues from just watching a video or listening to a lecture presentation. You have to get up out of your seats and go through a simulated situation. And so I developed this training program based on my own experiences in the Army and in law enforcement. And here we are. One of the things that I try to emphasize to good church people, there's so many examples of good church people meaning well, but they just don't have the background, training, or experience. to handle a situation. And one of the things I try to caution and remind people, because everyone over the last several years is really, everyone is guns, 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 active shooter, active shooter, active shooter. And I try to remind people, folks, before that gunman walked into the Baptist Church at Sutherland Springs, before that guy walked into that church down there at the last one, Christ Crossing,
White Settlement.
White Settlement. Okay. How many years have gone by, and how many times do you think they had a domestic situation, a custody dispute, an ugly divorce? I guarantee you they dealt with that stuff so many more times before that day came. And I try to tell folks, look, yes, prepare, but make doggone sure you round out your training by being prepared with basic verbal skills and first aid.
Absolutely.
I'll give you an example of a situation that happened to a friend of mine at a church. And actually, and I think, Jim, can I call you Jim? James?
Yeah, that's fine.
I think you noticed that I made a post, I made a comment about a recent event in Oklahoma City between a delivery man and a gentleman who identified himself as a homeowners association.
Yes.
Let me apply that to a church situation that is exactly a similar situation.
Sure.
A number of years ago, a buddy of mine, I was talking with a buddy of mine recently, and he shared with me, because we're talking about de-escalation training and how some folks just don't know how to approach people. Remember, there's two parts. Okay, you have that approach, and then you have the interaction. And he was new at this church, and he came a little bit late. Parking lot was full, and he found a spot. Oh, he pulled in. As he's getting out, he suddenly hears a voice sternly tell him, "Hey, you can't park there." My buddy looks around and realizes there's a parking lot attendant addressing him. My friend tells me, it wasn't so much that I wasn't supposed to park there. It was how he was telling me, the tone of voice, the body language. And I'm sure this guy meant well. But he just didn't know how to approach him. My buddy said, in a flash, I became defensive. And so on. I just got in my car and moved. And he said, I actually, as I drove around, because I actually thought about driving away and looking for another church. I've heard similar stories like that. And how many times have our people, good people, probably inadvertently turned away someone just because of their tone of voice and their body language? Because it begins right there. And one of the things that I point out with churches and all that, this de-escalation training is not just for security. It's for your ushers, your greeters, your office staff, because on any given weekday, it's just your office staff there dealing with someone who comes in there asking for financial aid and then goes off the deep end.
Absolutely. We had, not too long ago, we had a woman come in, and she asked for some money, and she was told no. And so immediately she got into the face of one of our pastors, and immediately started saying that she was going to declare war on our church and all this, from the book of Revelation and all this other stuff. And we found out a little bit later, that several of the local churches have actually trespassed her because she's made similar threats and that sort of thing. But that happened during the week. So absolutely. Right. And, we try and have that conversation with, on a regular basis. We really do.
I've had people, I went back and forth with this one lady, because I asked rhetorically, how would you handle this situation? It was a posting I had some years ago. And someone responded, well, I'd show them the love of Christ. And I tried to get a little more detail about that, because I know from experience, you saying that you will show the love of Christ is very different when you're jacked up under adrenaline and under a stressful confrontation. And so I wanted to draw out from her, what exactly do you mean that you're going to show the love of Christ? Are you going to lay hands on them? What exactly do you mean you're going to show the love of Christ? It's very different. And you don't know how you're going to react and respond under stress until you're under some stress. And I have seen some good people in a lot of church groups that we've trained, and no fault of their own. They just don't know. Sure. And then they suddenly find themselves under some stress, and they're really mishandling situations with my instructor role players that in real life would have really escalated the situation. But that scenario right there is one of my bread and butter ones. I'll either have one of my females, and I use females too, former and current police officers, because, and Paul will tell you, because I think, Paul, you got a law enforcement background. People handle women very differently. And so I have some of my females will play the role, and you know, just keep trying to keep people on their toes. You can talk about it, you can watch all the how-to videos, but until you're in that moment, you just don't know. One of the I created another offshoot of my training called decision-making drills for armed church security. Basically the same thing, because I had observed, especially beginning with my church and a lot of other churches, you have a lot of folks that go to the range and they shoot and they shoot and they shoot, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all they're doing. No one is going back and they're actually working together as a fire team to not necessarily work on clearing the halls and buildings and stuff like that. But I mean, they're not working together to work together as a team. And so I create these scenarios where basically just like this, and one of my female instructors will go in there and ask for financial aid, then go off the deep end, and then she'll suddenly pull a blade out of her bra. And now what are you going to do? Because now, just like that, it can become a lethal force encounter. And I force these folks, you know, because a lot of them carry radios. Well, have you actually practiced using your radios under stress? Because you see what I'm saying? Because until you've done it, and everyone who has gone through the decision-making drills with me have all come back and say, wow, that is a real eye-opener. It is a real eye-opener to suddenly, you know, because when they're at the range, they're very, everything becomes very sloppy when you're under stress.
Sure.
And so anyway, I created that. Everything's just scenario-based. I just, based on my own experience, and especially the verbal de-escalation, you really can't develop that self-confidence, proficiency, and efficiency from just reading about it, watching it, or being talked to. You've got to go through it. But again, let me just emphasize again, I'm just the face of the business. The magic really happens with the men and women who are my instructors. They're really what makes it happen.
One of the things that you touched on, I want to circle back and then open it up to the guys if they have any questions or whatnot. You mentioned practicing and that it's very hard to get an idea without being in a simulated environment or situation. And we actually, not too long ago, I had a group of law enforcement officers training, and we were actually training in de-escalation with our safety team at our church. And they actually threw me into a situation with an individual and didn't tell me that the individual actually had a firearm on him. And his intent was to go into the church. And the scenario was he was upset because he was trying to get to his kids, which his wife had brought in. They had separated. His wife had dropped off the kids in Sunday school. And so he came in to get them and was acting irate and that sort of thing. And so I went up to him and I just started talking to him, and I said, okay, how can I help you? What can I do for you? And tried to kind of start empathizing with him. Well, what I didn't realize, like I said, they threw me in. I didn't realize that he had a firearm. By the time we got done, it was the longest conversation that anyone had with that individual. And he never got to the point of drawing the firearm. Nice. And so, afterwards, the police chief that was with me came up to me and he said, he had a gun on him. He was supposed to pull the gun and shoot you, but you never gave him you never gave him the chance because you were addressing him in a way. He said, I'm trying to get my officers to empathize and address him. That's why we're doing this training. So, but it was very eye-opening for me to see. And I think, honestly, that was probably one of the aha moments that I had. And I've been in church safety now for probably close to 12 years. And, but that was the point where I said, what, we have a lot of people like this coming into our churches. We have a lot of folks that have mental health issues or folks that are going through divorce or stressful situations. And we just really need to be prepared for there's a far higher statistical rate of a separated couple coming in and having a situation in our church than there is an active shooter or someone coming in with, with a firearm. So and I think honestly, I'm going to turn it over to Mike and Paul here, but I think that's, in a sense, that's kind of how we got started as a group here, because, much of the church safety stuff that was out there when we first started this group was because, or was mainly focused on firearm stuff and shooting and how to handle active shooter, because I think in our minds that's like the scariest possibility potential out there. But at the same time, this is the stuff that we deal with every week, and we all know that with the COVID situation and people coming back to church, that's going to escalate and elevate the amount of depression and mental health concerns in our society that the church needs to be prepared for, to step in and say, this is how we're helping, and this is what we're doing in that type of situation. Mike, did you have a question or something? I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I wanted to play off of John, some of what you said in the beginning. As a person who has been that role player for Homeland Security in the state of Massachusetts, totally see how the dynamic shift happens from tabletop exercises to talking through trainings to actually putting law enforcement officers like yourself, as well as EMTs and firefighters, into an active threat integrated type course where they're creating those warm zones and creating that active shooter scenario in a school, in a church, in a different area. You can see how even the same police officers that you're having lunch with go from, okay, having the conversation, being real about it and being serious, to dialing it up quickly and right in the moment. So I've been on the other end of that gun, if you know what I mean, and it hurts. But at the same point, that role player, that dynamic is tremendous.
I also now have started over the last year implementing a surprise medical emergency in my scenarios, and I won't let the client know I'm doing it, to keep them on their toes and to remind them that you have to stay on top of your first aid, your AED, and stuff like that. And that is a real eye-opener for them too, because in real life, you can be dealing with someone who's yelling, screaming, and obnoxious, and they will just suddenly drop with a heart attack. Now what? Because we've seen this happen. We've seen some folks just stand there and do nothing. And then we ask them, well, what are you going to do? Well, they were just loud and rude. No, you need to get down on your knees and start thumping on that chest, because you don't want to be on someone's YouTube video saying this is how the folks at this church handled Uncle Joe when he was upset about parking and suddenly had a heart attack. They just stood there and watched him die. I try to tell people, always assume you're on someone's video camera. Always assume it.
My background real quick, and then I'll turn it over to Paul. my background real quick. I was a firefighter EMT for about 10 years, and we had a situation actually at our church a couple of years ago where an individual collapsed, and we started to do CPR on him, and because he stopped breathing, and his wife actually came up and started, and I was like, he collapsed on me into my arms. And as I was laying him down to open his airway and assess things and get going, his wife came up behind me and grabbed my back and grabbed my arms and was screaming in my ear at the top of her voice, "Do something! You have to do something! You have to save him!" And so thankfully we had a sweet retired nurse. She came over and she saw what I was doing, and she said, "James, what do you need from me?" And I said, "I need you to take care of her so that I can focus." So she pulled, she was able to physically move her and take her away and kind of hold her and say, "You know what? He knows what he's doing. Let him do that." And we laugh about it now, but they don't remember, her husband doesn't remember what happened. He doesn't remember being on the floor. He has that loss of memory, and she doesn't remember. You know, she literally was like beating on my back, and she doesn't remember doing that. And so she's like, I'm so sorry. And I said, you know what? I understand, but that's to your point on throwing in the first aid. That's an awesome idea. I like that a lot, because that's one other thing that just pushes the training and the preparedness. So Paul, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'll be quiet now.
No, this is good. This is great dialogue, because, and I could see other conversations down the road that we have with you, John, because this is invaluable training, because we're taking all of these components that are in a moving real world environment, and they really happen, and integrating them together, because it isn't only about the gun. And I commented into the feed here, and James echoed it, that a lot of times what gets churches off the bench to start a safety team is, oh crud, this church got shot up, we better get guns. And then they realize, like many things that we get into in life, we're like, oh, there's so much more to this. You know, I'm going to get married. Okay, now you need a house, and then there's babies, and then you got to change babies. So all of these things, I mean, I'm being kind of silly, but all of these things coalesce together. And, you know, during a medical call, you could have somebody freak out and try to hurt you. I have actually seen, and James, you've done EMS. I've seen people freak out at medical situations and actually begin to hurt the people that are trying to help. And then going way back, the main crux of my comment was, I got my background in de-escalation from verbal judo, and it was all, like you said, it was all dry erase board, it was all audiobook, and very little of it was real world. And we actually started like wargaming this. And I would love to go through some of your stuff, because we were wargaming this, and I've got to do it several times with different like departments where I've been pulled in as a bad guy and gotten to role play. But those skills are absolutely crucial, because I can think of 3 times off the top of my head. And you mentioned a law enforcement background. I have worked alongside law enforcement as a civilian police chaplain. I've never carried a gun, but I have been in some pretty hairy situations, and God has really opened my eyes to things, everything from fights to de-escalation. I've been in 3 really, really critical church safety situations that were going to go physical. Huge collision, fist fight, violent situations. And without good quality people skills, de-escalation skills, they were going to go physical. And I had to immediately build rapport and be able to de-escalate and help people to understand, hey, I'm here to help. And I can tell you right now, I might not have walked away from one of them. And that's church safety. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we don't, you know, we separate active shooter, but we don't often think about how just physical violence can get completely out of control. So I'm super excited about the fact that you're taking all these elements and putting them together and spinning this up, because this is the real world.
And one of the things that we do for realism, going back to a medical situation with a domestic couple, one of my scenarios is security. You've been called to the nursery daycare. There's a custody dispute. That's all they know, because in real life, that's all you would know. They walk up and they start trying to mediate the situation between the male and female, and both of them suddenly now turn on them. I've had that happen. Now, how are you going to handle that? You're already right off the bat conditioned yourself or told yourself the guy is probably the bad guy. Everyone automatically thinks that. I've been in enough situations where it was the woman, but what do you do, and how do you handle a situation when suddenly both of them, who were just now a moment ago at each other's throat, now turn on you and your partner, and all you're trying to do is help? That can really jack some people up, and that is just the realism of what can happen.
I think one of the principles I've seen there is the idea, when you come into any situation where you're trying to gain trust, learn from them, and listen. I've found that to be real intentional about not using the word but, and instead use the word because. So you try to listen to them and say, I understand that this is how you feel because of this, this, and this. And really kind of agree with them that that's rational. The behavior kind of coming out of that is where we want to be the parent and say but all the time. And so by eliminating that but, we're not immediately negating all that credibility we just built for the first 30 seconds. We're continuing to build that conversation.
that initial contact, those first 30 seconds that you mentioned are absolutely critical. Jim, going back to your incident where you talked this guy down and he never had a chance to re-escalate himself. We do every now and then, my team and I will have someone who does that. And that's great. That goes back to my point that it's that initial contact, and it all depends on your facial expression and your body language. Because you can imagine that if you had first walked up to that gentleman and had a sassy tone of voice, hey man, what's wrong? Da 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 da, or walked up there with your hands on your hips or your arms crossed, any number of things that he was probably waiting for you to do, but you didn't do it. Because innately, apparently, Jim, you have great people skills. For you to be able to do that. So hey, I'm going to applaud you. I'm going to just say right now publicly, Jim's got good people skills. So, but that is exactly right. That initial contact is absolutely critical. You want to try to avoid, trigger phrases, telling people to calm down. That's at the top of the list. You want to avoid telling someone to calm down. What do you usually get? I am calm, and then it goes sideways from there, right? Exactly. I'm not saying I never used it. I'm just saying from experience, it does not work, and you want to try to avoid it.
Yeah.
And in verbal,
whether they're 3 or 30.
That's exactly right. Never in the history of calm down has anyone ever calmed down when being told to calm down.
I have a friend of mine in law enforcement who's a church safety instructor. He's very, very good at what he does. And he told me he had de-escalated a guy at the scene of some event, had the guy completely calm down. And he said, my backup rolls in. And he said, the guy there was to kick butt. That guy was there to kick butt and chew bubble gum, and he was out of bubble gum. And he said, the guy comes up and he said, the person that was now calm felt the need to reiterate the story to the other officer and began to get more and more, verbally, louder and gyrating. And the officer goes, simmer. And he goes, about that. Boom, it hit the ground and the three of us are rolling in a fight. He said, I was like, I had this.
Yep. I cannot tell you how many times. As a matter of fact, for those of you who watch John Correa with Active Self-Protection, he had a video not too long ago of a police officer shooting off at the mouth. He actually was a supervisor on scene, and he absolutely escalated the situation. And the last I heard, I looked it up on the media, and John Correa mentioned it too, but he's lost his job and they're charging him.
Wow.
I have seen that happen. I will have a situation under control and someone else will roll up because they just want to get into something and shoot off at the mouth. And the next thing you know, we are all rolling around. It has happened more often than not. Well, maybe not, but just too many times. Once is way too many times. But yeah, it happens, and it's unfortunate. And for those of us police officers, you get to learn. And just like you can think of someone in your lifetime who you've identified, they have a knack with people. I can assure you can think of someone or two or three that you just know they would be the wrong person to be in a certain situation because it would just go sideways in a heartbeat.
One of the things, and I've seen that happen with church safety teams as well, for sure. I actually spent 2 years working with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office in California as a reserve volunteer officer with them. And so I've been in a few domestic situations. That was by far most of what we dealt with. And, but, from a church safety team perspective, we've had several situations where we've seen that, where when we pair up, that's one of the things that we'll say now. We'll say, okay, you know what? If you have a team, if you have two people responding, because we always have like a supervisor and someone else responding on our team. But if you have those people are handling that situation. So you don't, if it's confrontational or voices are raised, or you sense, in some point that things got loud and it's not right, let them take care of it. You can ask a simple, ask the supervisor or ask one of the people that are there real simply, can I do something for you? Can I help you out? But at that point, it's their it's their monkey, it's their circus, because too many times we've seen, even in drills and practicing, people step in and mean well, but to be honest, it just, not only does it become a train wreck, but it really destroys everything. Like Mike said earlier, it destroys everything that you've already worked so hard. But
that is actually why I break down my classes into teams of 2 or 3. And then they go to a separate scenario station. I don't do scenarios in front of an audience, the class, because you just become stressed out performing in front of your peers. So I have 4 scenario stations set up elsewhere, and you and Paul, or just you and Mike, or even all 3 of you, depending on the size of class, would go interact with my role player, instructor role player, and it's more of a one-on-one type of situation. And this is where you develop that teamwork, because if Paul suddenly sees that Jim is getting sucked into the moment, he's beginning to raise his own voice. This is where Paul's got to be able to step up and go, Jim, hang on a second. Pastor wants to talk to you real quick. Jim has to have the discipline and the recognition. Okay, I better step back, because I've seen this happen too. No, I got this. And it just goes sideways. I've seen it. So this is why you work together as a team. You've got to be able to learn how each other handles stress and all that. And same thing with weapons and firearms. I know that some of the guys at my church and other churches too, they'll spend lots of money to go do their own training. And when they come back, they're unfortunately not able to really pass that on to everyone else. And now you have this training disparity. And now they have an idea of how to handle a certain situation, but do you really have the confidence that this other guy who didn't go do the same training is going to not do something that could jeopardize you or the situation you're dealing with? But that's the same thing with verbal de-escalation. And that's why I am really big on making sure people learn how to work together as a team.
Nice. So James, I wanted to throw something in there real quick. Did you have anything before I made a comment?
No, go for it.
So, John, I ended up in a real-world situation that these kinds of skills paid off. I was riding with a department one night. There is a chaplain. We pull up, and it's one of those one riot, one ranger situations, small town, no backup. And we pull up, and we were called to a domestic disturbance. And it looks like half a football team is in the front yard. There's mom and dad and the couple, and they're about to get a divorce. And then there's a couple of friends and a couple of friends. There's literally in excess of 8 people in the yard. And it looks like something that needed to happen at like WWE. And it just about to go down. And so my friend goes over, the law enforcement officer, and I looked at him and I said, "Do you want me out of the car?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to see what I can do to help diffuse this." And he's outnumbered like 8-1, and in excess of 8-1. And so I hop out, and it was one of those God moments, because I actually knew the sister of the mom of one of the parties. And so I came up and I was like, "Hey, is so-and-so your sister?" And she goes, "Yeah." And she's really emotional. And I realized within a matter of moments that mom number 1, who's being dealt with by the officer, is a hinge pin. And she's causing a lot of drama, and not meaning to, but she's causing it. And then over here, mom number 2, well, you make my wife cry, and I'm not going to think rationally. And so now this is happening over here, and everybody's starting to, and so I start talking to her, and this is what diffused it. And it was real life practical de-escalation, and it was a lot of the things that I learned in verbal judo, and a baptism of fire, because I didn't have as much of the real world stuff then as I do now. So again, I'd love to go through your stuff because it sounds amazing. So I'm standing here and I said, "So what's the crux of this thing? There's going to be a divorce. They're getting ready to split everything." It was over a washer and dryer. And one side of the family had gifted the washer and dryer and wanted it back, and the other party goes, "No." And so I was able to lean in and build rapport with her. And I said, because my son just turned 20 and he would have been like 17 at the time. He wasn't much younger than her son. And I said, I think a lot of times in these situations, we actually hurt probably at least as much for our kids as they actually hurt. And she goes, "Oh, you're right about that." And I said, "I'm going to ask you a question." And I said, "You tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm out of line." And she goes, "Okay." I said, would it might be better if you like let the washer and dryer go if it gives your son any peace?" And she goes, "Yeah." And the whole thing went, it was like those water fountains, and somebody cuts the power, and it just went, And my buddy came over, it diffused and they went their separate directions. He comes over and he's like, dude, that was amazing. And I was like, thank you, Jesus.
That is outstanding. You know what? And that's out of the verbal judo playbook. Everyone wants to be treated with dignity and respect. And one of the things I teach people in my class, you need to recognize and understand that there's not something that there's not anything that someone is going through that you haven't gone through at some point. We've all been hurt. We've been angry. We've been disappointed. We've been frustrated. We may have better coping skills, but that doesn't mean that you cannot relate at some level what they're going through. And you've got to be able to establish that rapport, that connection. Otherwise, you are not going to be able to very successfully de-escalate that situation. And you being able to recognize, Paul, that was that connection right there, and the sound of reason, that is absolutely critical. But at the same time, this is where teamwork comes in, because your partner Jim or Mike could have been saying the same thing, but in that moment they're so hateful towards Mike, they're not hearing it. Right. But you're able to come in and say, hey, maybe we just let the washer and dryer go. Oh yeah. And I try to tell folks, if someone has expressively said they do not want to talk to you, and I've seen church security and church personnel escalate a situation because, no, I'm going to be the one to fix it. I'm the one going to talk to you. If someone has already told you very clearly they do not want to talk to you, break contact, hand them off to someone else. And this is, again, where teamwork comes in. So anyway, that was phenomenal, Paul. I congratulate you, my friend.
Yeah, that was a fire.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I think, scrolling back here a little ways, that we got asked, what specific de-escalation techniques do you promote? You kind of went over that a little bit, but for the sake of folks that maybe joined a little bit late, what are just some quick things to keep in mind that might be able to help somebody with that conversation?
Really, there's no easy answer to that, because when you're dealing with a human being, it is so fluid and so dynamic. But in my experience, it boils down to three very basic fundamentals: your appearance, facial expression, body language; your communication, the words you use, your tone of voice, and your engagement in the moment. Are you actively effective listening? Are you expressing empathy and compassion? Those things have to play together, and it begins with you in that first initial contact with somebody. If you walk up there with this expression of disgust or whatever, you have already escalated the situation before you even said a word. As you walk up to someone and you're reading their body language, someone says, hey, Jim, can you come over here? We got this lady kind of upset over in the nursery, and you're wargaming in your head, how am I going to handle the situation? As you come around the corner, you are immediately reading her body language. My friend, I assure you, she's reading yours too. And if you walk in there around that corner with this expression or this body language, I'm going to deal with this. I'm so sick of this today. You are guaranteed to be rolling around, getting scuffed up and all that, because I've seen it happen. You have got to. So to answer that question, I would say just recognize it begins with you. In a nutshell. I mean, there's more to it, but sure. In a nutshell, it begins with you and how you react and respond and how you initially make contact.
I laugh at that because, something that I do, and I didn't realize I was doing it until somebody came up to me, but, Paul and I have talked about this before. When I'm in deep thought, when I'm analyzing and assessing stuff, I actually scrunch my face up. So I look like I'm going to punch somebody.
Yes.
There are times when, I've been standing like in the sanctuary of our church and looking, I look at who's coming in, who's leaving, body language, that sort of thing. And I've had people come up to me and say, are you okay? Are you mad at somebody? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. There's no problem. And they're like, well, you look like you're going to punch somebody. And so that was another one of those eye-opening things for me, because if I'm walking somewhere and I'm thinking in my mind, this is a dispute. We were just called, like you mentioned, for me now, I have to train myself to think, okay, immediately how, what's my facial expressions? Am I showing that I'm in deep thought, or, do I walk up? So for me, that's been an opportunity and something that I've had a hard time working with, honestly. And
that's exactly why it's so critical. That is why my team of instructor role players plays such a critical part, because a lot of people don't realize, like you have that self-realization that you have a tendency to frown and so on. But right after a scenario, my instructor role players go into the critique phase, where we always affirm and validate what people did right, because we want them to keep doing that. And then we're going to talk about the things that they're probably not aware that they're doing. Like, hey, Mike, do you realize you have a tendency to roll your eyes, or, smack your lips? And without that knowledge, without that self-realization of how you are dealing with stress yourself, you could go through life with a PhD from verbal judo and always get in the crap because you're the problem.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I think that facial expression is one of the biggest things, because as a civilian chaplain, I've gotten involved in a number of altercations, mostly verbal, but I've been in fistfights backing up cops, and you can express so much with your facial expression. And I was backing up a police officer one day, and a guy was getting ready to go to jail. He had grabbed his mom and slammed her into the wall by the throat in Missouri. It's like class 3 felony now. And had she pressed charges, he could have gone to jail, and come to find out he has a warrant for something else. Go figure. And he glances over at the officer. He hears over the radio that he's going to jail. He glances at the officer's face, at the officer's weapon, and then glances at me. And apparently I did an approximation of a werewolf reveal. I just kind of went, when he did that, he was actually moving his body, and he was preparing. He like turning the foot, moving the body. He was going to try to bum rush the officer and go for his gun. And so apparently I broadcast something to him, and he goes, and the officer trusses him up, hauls him to jail, gives him a great dad talk on the way to the jail. On the way back, the cop's cracking up. He goes, "That was hilarious." I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "Dude, you just kind of went, what and he said, "You went from just like calm to not happy at all."
And it can happen just like that in a blink of an eye. That's right.
Oh my goodness. That is crazy. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I know we're running out of time. I have one more personal story that kind of brings everything together.
Sure.
And I'd probably like to close with that, just to emphasize that it's your ACE, what I call your ACE: appearance, communication, and engagement. Can I go ahead and get into it?
Go for it.
Okay. I had my own personal experience a couple years ago. I work part-time security at the church. Fridays, we have a skeleton crew there. The church is closed, but we have maintenance and custodial picking up things. Individual came inside the church. He ignored my friendly, cheerful greeting, stormed past me. I recognized that he had a very angry gait. And this is where you need to develop this situation awareness. If I ask you to describe an angry walk, you probably have a hard time doing it, but you doggone sure can recognize an angry walk when you see it, right? So this is when you need to start putting things together in your head. All right, this guy is ignoring my greeting. He has an angry walk. He's walking down the hallway, down towards the pastor's offices. I follow him. He's out of sight for a moment. I hear this angry knock. I know it's an angry knock because I sense it's an angry knock. If I asked you to describe an angry knock, it's just louder than normal, right? Okay, now I know from experience that how I make contact with them is going to set the tone for the rest of this contact. If I had come around the corner with my arms crossed, okay, I already know I'm dealing with potentially an angry man. This is not a friendly look, even if I have a smile on my face. If I come around the corner with my hands on my hips, right, or I'm pointing at him, none of that would probably go very well. As it was, I just peeked around the corner real quick. I looked at his hands, because it's his hands that's going to hurt you. And I see he's got nothing in his hands. I give him another cheerful greeting. I keep the corner of the wall between him and I, but I'm still cheerfully greeting him. I said, "Sir, is there something going on?" This is where engagement comes in, active reflective listening. He starts telling me that they have an adult special needs son volunteering at the church. The night before, they had a ministry-wide meeting. And when the son came home and tried to explain what the meeting was all about, it kind of came out sounding like the church was basically telling this man not to come back. So of course the dad was upset. Mm-hmm. As soon as I heard him say that he had a special needs son, I said, "Sir, I can appreciate what you're going through and the frustration, because I have a special needs daughter. And I know how scary it can be. And I know how frustrating it can be. once I made that connection with him, the deflation began.
Yep.
But it all really begins. I would not have had that opportunity to connect with this man. And again, we've all have similar experiences to people. I would not have been able to connect with this man if I had come around that corner. And I wouldn't have been in the wrong and just told him, hey, you're trespassing, sir. I'm going to call the police. I wouldn't have been wrong, but it wouldn't have been the right thing to do.
Right.
And that's where a lot of good people, meaning well, wanting to do a good job, don't realize just because it's the right thing to do or you have the right to do it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do at the time. So I just wanted to share that with you. It all comes down to you, how you make that initial contact and how you engage with that person. Jim, just like the situation you were in, and even Paul with even just making that flash werewolf expression. You know, it's how you make that initial engagement for that initial contact for the situation at the time, because no two situations are the same.
For sure. Well, I really wish, I feel like we could go another hour here talking with you. So with your permission, we definitely would like it to come back if you're available to at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And hopefully it'll be a bit of benefit. I think it was great tonight, honestly. Great information, great content. Hopefully it'll benefit some of the other churches. We are actually, I'll go ahead and have Paul close us in a word of prayer, and then we will bid you good night, sir.
Thank you.
Well, guys, I hope all of you guys out there listening to this now and during the next week and time to come, I hope that you guys have enjoyed this as much as we have. And we're peeling back the layers of the onion. There's so much more than locking doors and having cameras and having firearms. There's so much more to this. And guys, you win 100% of the battles that you don't have to fight. And I know police officers that can't feel part of their hand or have permanent nerve damage in their body from altercations, and you don't come back from that. And I know officers that have had career-ending injuries, and we don't want that in church safety. So nobody wins those things when you're hurt for life. So the stuff that John is talking about is the meat and potatoes of church safety. This is good stuff. So I'm going to close us in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord God, I ask that you would bless this man, his ministry, his family, Lord God, give him the desires of his heart. His goal is to make us better sheepdogs, to help us to have the skills it takes to protect our churches and to prevent problems from happening. Lord God, I think of your word that a gentle answer turneth away wrath, Lord God, and that's where we're at with this. And so I would encourage, Lord God, anybody that hears this to take this man's courses, to take the opportunity to learn from him, Lord God, and ask that you would bless, that you would guide and protect our churches. As for many of us, this week and next week, we are going back to some semblance of normal services. So we lift up tonight to you in your son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, guys.
Our pleasure.
All right, guys. So real quick, if you're watching, thanks for joining us tonight. We'll call it an evening. Again, we want to shout out and are grateful to our sponsors, Full Armor Church, and also Trinity Security Allies. Trinity Security Allies, Jim and Wendy Howard, they've got some great webinars, great content through the month of May that they're making available to churches. So definitely reach out to them. Take a look at their website. I think every Thursday through May, Jim has been doing webinars on Zoom, and great content. Very helpful, very informative, and good information. Other than that, feel free to reach out to us. You can visit us on churchsafetyguys.com. And again, we will go through the folks that joined us here tonight live, and we will draw a name. And the name that we draw will actually receive a free copy of the Church Suspicious Behavior book from Kingswood Security and Worship Security Association. And then they'll actually also receive a free month's subscription to the video content that goes along with that. And again, another great resource. So check us out on YouTube. We have a great YouTube channel with past broadcasts, and we've actually gone in on YouTube and also Church Safety Guys on our Facebook page, and actually listed topics and episode numbers for all of the past episodes that we've done. And so if you're looking for a particular topic now, it's real easy to go back and track that down and find out who we had on or what we talked about that particular day. So
I want to throw something in really quick there.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
You guys know out there in viewer land, James spent an enormous amount of time cataloging these and helping them to be searchable and breaking these things down. So he spent a lot of time, credit where credit's due, and Mike is producing some amazing artwork. So you'll start seeing things, artwork and different things that are going on. A lot of the stuff behind the scenes that just seems to magically happen. Mike has been making that happen. So there's a lot more to this than maybe it looks like. I mean, it looks like we powder our noses and do a video, but there's quite a bit that goes on here. So these guys, these guys do a lot of work behind the scenes. So back to you.
Thanks. So powder
Thanks,
our
Paul.
noses? What?
I'll pay you later.
You're right.
So anyhow, but if you're in a situation where you need help, or you need even a lot of times we get conversations where somebody will bounce something off of us, like a policy change or hey, how would you guys handle this? That's what we're here for. I mean, we're available 24/7. You can reach us through the website, message us on Facebook. We all have separate pages that we check, probably far too much. And
Yes.
we talk multiple times daily, so
True.
probably also far too much.
I think we
Well,
talk
and even
better than our spouses.
What's
sometimes I think certain days, yes, Paul.
that?
What I'd say even too, James, is that for folks, we're each in 3 different states. So we have different parts of the country covered as well. So I know even my backyard, Texas is a very big state, but I've had a few people reach out to me from across the state and say, hey, this is just a great time to have a conversation. I'm having a conversation with a church on Tuesday, and they happen to be relatively close here in the state of Texas, but we're going to initiate the conversation and kind of say, hey, what are you guys doing? What are we doing? How can I help? If we have a training at our church or they have one at theirs, how can we get together? So it's all about what can you do. And so sometimes that being helpful is just taking that phone call.
Absolutely. And that's, I mean, we when we say we have partners with folks that have been on the, like that we encourage on the website, that sort of thing, those are resources. So for example, when I think, okay, this individual's in Florida, you're asking me about it. Who do I think of? Jim and Wendy Howard. I'm like, hey, you know what? Let me call Jim. And surprisingly, Jim still answers my phone calls when I call him. He hasn't gotten tired of me texting or calling him. But to Mike's point, I got a message a couple of weeks ago from a church in New Hampshire, and I'd never talked to him before, and somebody that just found our info and started kind of watching our broadcasts, and they said, hey, can you, I'm dealing with this situation. Can you just tell me your thoughts? And sometimes, and I mean, we had a great dialogue back and forth, and he was like, thank you so much when we were done. But sometimes it's nice to just have another set of ears to kind of bounce things off of with our own situations. I mean, I've called Paul before and been like, okay, how do I handle this situation? What do you think I should do? And that's really what we try and do, and try and make ourselves available. So train, equip, and disciple. That's kind of our thing. So until next week, we should be talking about de-escalation again. That's part 2 we have a 2-part series this month. And then following that, I believe have Ron Aguiar coming on, and he is the author of Keeping Your Church Safe, the book written and endorsed by the USCCA. He's actually going to be joining us and talking with us about church safety and different things like that. So you don't want to miss that. Mark that on your calendar. If you go and you follow us on our Facebook page, then you'll be updated whenever we go live or we put an event out. So you're welcome to do that. And then you're welcome to click and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, because we always post our videos on YouTube. So that being said, we will see you next week. Take care. God bless and have a great week.
Good night, folks.